Tossing Grenades at Windmills podcast.
Welcome to the Tossing Grenades at Windmills podcast. I'm Rhombus Tix. This is a series of old stories I'm reading that I wrote a while ago called Swamp Castle. The name of today's story is Abraham Lincoln's Doctor's Direwolf. James Wilkes Booth rolled swiftly, shaking with terror. Something was coming for him, something terrible in the night. He had nearly succeeded in his assassination, but the one of the creatures leapt up between the tyrant and his appointment with a bullet. Booth didn't know if it had lived or not. It seemed to shrug off the bullet like it wasn't even there, and Booth didn't stop to stand around and sign autographs. This time. Booth had spotted its mate within seconds after he bolted out of the theater. It was a wolf the size of a small horse, and Booth could swear its eyes glowed red. Enough. He focused his thoughts on the here and now. Booth found another creek and directed his horse to run up it. The horse was skittish at first, but when Booth jammed his legs into the horse's thighs, it rolled its eyes with pain and terror and trotted at a fast pace into the flowing water. He had read in a book somewhere that this would throw off the scent of dogs. Then he remembered that the book was Uncle Tom's Cabin, swore, and pulled the horse out of the far side of the river. Something rustled above him. Booth whipped out his cavalry revolver and shot at it. A dead bird landed with perfect precision on the horse's head. This spooked the horse, which immediately stopped and threw Booth forward into a tree, knocking the wind out of him. The horse continued to gallop away. It knew what was coming for them. It felt no sense of loyalty strong enough to stay. Booth lay on the ground, rolling back and forth in a whirl of pain. He was sure he had broken something. A few ribs and one of his wrists at the least. He heard howling in the distance. Was there more than one? He didn't care. He couldn't afford the luxury of time, and with an act of sheer will forced himself to stand. Booth staggered on, looking left and right. He needed a plan. He needed a miracle. No miracle came, but it did. Closer, 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 ever closer. He could hear them a few minutes away now. What was he going to do? He desperately looked around, trying to think of something. He saw a gathering of brush. Racing over towards it, he lit it on fire, pouring a bit of his bourbon on it, fanning the flames. Immediately, it began to catch fire. Thank God the mist and fog surrounding the woods hadn't seeped into the branches. The fire's light spread. Downing the last of the bourbon, he leapt over the fire and began to run. The alcohol helped dull the pain, but he could still feel it in his ribs and wrist. Running, infinite running. He felt like he was bleeding somewhere, and his breath was becoming labored, but he could not give up. He dare not stop. There was a howl of fear and pain for a brief moment. Had the beast run into the fire through the fog? Excellent. Then Booth could hear padded feet, lolling tongues, and a panting breath behind him for a while, then utter silence. Had they stopped? He paused a moment, just a moment, while he desperately caught his breath, swallowing it in by the bucketful. He had not seen them. A small, desperate seedling of hope began to bloom in his soul as he ran on. Then he saw a pair of yellow eyes waiting for him. The tongue was panting happily, just like a dog might, but Booth saw death in those eyes. No wolf could be that large. This had to be a nightmare. He turned around, ready to run the opposite way, this time only to have the wolf run around him with astonishing speed and impede his progress. This time the thing snarled and slowly began to approach. Booth panicked and began to climb the nearest tree that he could find. He wrapped his hands around and at first let go of the pain, but one look at the wolf's eyes and he ignored the pain and climbed up again. It hurt more than anything he'd ever felt. Booth wanted to let go, but he didn't care. The wolf leapt up and grabbed his back, sinking its fangs in and pulled him back playfully but forcefully. The cloth ripped, and the wolf fell back down. Booth managed to get up to the lower branches. The thing leapt up into the air again, tearing a gash into his leg, sinking its jaws in. Booth howled in agony, but sunk his fingers into the tree until they bled. He pulled his other leg up over the tree to get as much leverage as he could. His breathing became more and more labored, but he just focused on keeping hold. To let go was to die. The dog monster would not let go either. It was a wolf, not a dog. It held his leg firmly in its jaws. Booth wanted to hit it with his arm, but the weight was so great that if he let go, even for an instant, he knew he would topple off the edge of the branch. For several moments there was peaceful equilibrium. Moments turned into minutes, and then the sounds of nature, silent at the conflict between the two, slowly resumed. Frogs and crickets began the medley he remembered so fondly from his childhood home in his beloved Virginia. He would miss it so. The idea that it would endure slavery forever under the tyrant's yoke was enough to drive him to madness. Lincoln would be a hero lauded for generations to come when he was really a monster. But only a chosen few had had the wisdom to see that. Booth knew the truth. He would not yield to this monster, somehow, some way. He would live again to fight another day. And so would the South. The South would... And then the dog's jaw began to get slack. At last, a dash of hope. It hung its hind legs into the tree for more leverage, stubbornly refusing to let go. This continued for a few moments. Booth clawed on the tree, the wood making splinters in his fingers. Just as he was about to let go from the exhaustion and pain, he heard a snap and felt such a surge of pain that he felt he had enough strength to split the tree in two. With one arm, he pulled himself up another branch, while he yanked off another with his right arm and smashed it into the wolf's face. The wolf yelped, but did not let go. Both watched with disconnected surreality as his now broken leg dangled for a moment from his body, and then was ripped by the wolf who began to gnaw it below. The torrent of blood made him realize that he only had a few minutes to live, even if even that long. It was not the death he wanted, but at least he would go out fighting. As he blacked out, he swore he saw a light in the darkness. At first it was a tunnel of some kind, the gates of heaven or maybe even hell, but then he felt the heat. Something grabbed his leg, and a whole new kind of pain shot through his body as the newcomer jammed a torch into Booth's torn stump. Good, very good. It's not a perfect solution, but it will heal. Booth tried to whisper a response. He couldn't place the accent, and Booth knew accents well. It was a little bit Dutch, a little bit German, a little bit British. You can trust me. I'm a doctor. He gently patted Booth's shoulder reassuringly. The direwolf sat panting, pleased. Its master patted his head. Booth was excited. He was going to live. At least, I was a doctor, until my brother died in that southern prison camp. Booth did not like the sound of that. Then I felt I would come to America and help the cause of the Yankee. I brought with me a curious discovery I found in the valley of the most remote part of Africa. Just think, Mr. Booth. Had my brother not died, perhaps he would be tending your wounds instead of... Booth managed to mutter, of this. He pulled Booth's hand and yanked him out of the tree. What? Why? Booth could barely moan as the man lowered the torch to burn him more, forcing him to unconsciousness. Booth screamed. Lincoln is soft. He pardoned the other two. You're not getting away with it. The wolf howled and moved closer, licking its chops. The last thing Booth saw were the eyes of the wolf and the doctor. So, I'm going to give that story an A+++++, given the subject matter. In terms of quality, it's about a C at best. But, I clearly enjoyed writing that. I definitely enjoyed reading it. And I think we need more stories like that, because, let's be honest, James Wilkes Booth stood for liberty, and that liberty involved the cause of slavery and secession and sedition and assassination. I wrote this when I was trying to come up with ideas for stories, and I randomly came up with the idea of this title and wrote the entire story based on that. I think I squeezed about as much juice as could be squeezed out of this thing. It's got problems. First of all, it needs an edit job. Second of all, despite the fact that Booth is one of my least favorite people, it's still probably a little bit too sympathetic to Booth. We don't see Booth do a lot of the monstrous things that we all know he wanted to do and would do. The doctor doesn't even have a name, right? And by the way, my accent was terrible, and I apologize for that. The wolf is the coolest thing about this story. Probably heavily influenced by Game of Thrones. I don't know for sure. Direwolves, of course, are actual creatures that actually exist. They are not bulletproof, but in a world where they were still alive, why not? Overall, I think this story needs some edit jobs, is a gimmick, would never get out of a slush pile, but again, I enjoyed reading it, and I definitely enjoyed writing it.
This has been the Tossing Grenades at Windmills podcast. Buy my book, Have Name Will Travel, at Amazon and other markets. RedAnvilCreative.com contains all our podcasts. Copyright
2022!
To fight the forces of evil!